Okay, welcome back, everybody. Is the microphone seeming to work? Fantastic. So hopefully everybody online, huge thanks to you all for being there online. Welcome to this second panel of day 2 on reimagining geographical and gender identities. My name's Sarah Barrow. I'm here at UEA and delighted to be chairing this panel, this esteemed group of speakers. We have 3 speakers here with us. And one colleague online who's going to take the final position. Unfortunately, Habsa from USA isn't able to be here today, so we wish her well. It means we have 4 speakers. We are going to do our very best, though, to stick to the 15 minutes so that we've got time per speaker, so that we've got nice time for discussion. And if anybody has to miss anything out, give us a little nod and we'll kind of return to that in the questions, of course, but just in the spirit of fairness, I guess. So our first speaker for today, and while I'm going to be, do you want me to kind of flick through your slides or do you want to come up here and do the slides? You would rather do you? Yeah, I'll do them if you like. Yeah, okay. You will just need to make sure you've got a microphone, I think. Is that correct? Yeah. So that when you speak, you tell me when to change the slide. Okay. So our first speaker is Oksana Starshova from the University of Cambridge. And her paper is Immigrant Attachments, Real and Imagined Spaces of New York in John Kwok's novel Girl in Translation. Over to you.
In my project of the real and imagined spaces of New York, I'm discussing the role of spatial perceptions in the situation of migration, that is in the situation of transition between countries and cultures. I focus on the public and intimate spaces of New York and their significance for the shaping of immigrants' experience, the development of attachments and belonging, and the formation of a migrant's new identity. The imaginary of New York has a special appeal for the immigrants as a place embodying a dream of success, as a gateway into the promised land, and a huge multi-ethnic community where each new arrival can find a place of one's own. So the urban space of New York is imagined and reimagined through the prism of multiple immigrant visions. The guiding lines in my search will be those from Eliot's East Cocker that accentuate more forward through renunciation. Next slide, please. In order to arrive at what you do not know, you must go by a way which is the way of ignorance. In order to possess what you do not possess, you must go by the way of dispossession. In order to arrive at what you are not, you must go through the way in which you are not. And what you do not know is the only thing you know. And what you own is what you do not own. And where you are is where you are not. Eliot's set of paradoxes depicting acquisition by way of negation makes us realize the necessity of the erasure of all the known staples of existence for the sake of the new becoming. At the same time, it doesn't imply start from scratch, from the blank page. Rather, this hardly possible act obfuscates the boundaries between being and non-being, possession and dispossession, place and placelessness. Therefore, we find any immigrant in this state of liminality transition from one to another, from one place to another. This transition evokes the questions of attachments, which are before the act of transition are unasked and taken for granted. The perception of space is not born with a person, but it develops very early in the subconscious. Attachment to place is a vital aspect of human identity. The geography of the place forms the methods of orientation in the world. As a native, for example, of the steppe region opening to the sea, I might admire the beauty of mountains or dense forests, but where I feel comfort, safety, and I have enough air to breathe will be the vastness of open fields and border horizons. So the place matters for the development of attachments and belonging in the situation of transition. And different writers, I pick up writers of the recent 3 decades that have different ethnic background. They describe different models of this new perception of the new place. Like, for example, couple of examples. Joseph O'Neill, Turkish, Irish, English, in his novel Netherland, which tells us about this colonial, post-colonial issues in a very sophisticated manner. But we can also see a kind of transplantation of geography of the people from the Caribbean who arrived to New York, or like Lila Corman in her graphic novel Untersachen tries to reproduce, reimagine the space of Lower East Side New York inhabited by the Jews at the beginning of the, from Eastern Europe at the beginning of the 20th century. Or Open City novel by Teju Cole, in which he explores the space of New York, its buildings, monuments, streets, only to find out, to discover and dig the history of slavery and pain and tragedies below. So for this part of my project, I pick up Jean Kwok's semi-autobiographical novel, Girl in Translation. Jean Kwok herself was semi-autobiographical because there was quite a lot of facts from her own biography when she arrived with her family of one of the 7 children, and they lived in similar apartment, which she describes in her book, and they all had to work at the factory because parents would be unable to earn their wages without the help of the children, and many other things. But certainly she makes a kind of a melodramatic twist in the plot, because in her novel it is just a mother and a daughter who arrive here, and who these 2 women have to struggle, have to earn, have to pay back the debt that they got on for transition here. But all those hardships give the protagonist and the narrator of the story, Kimberly, strength and point in life to get out of the poverty and hard labor, and that she can only achieve by her talent to learn and access to good education. When she grows up and gets pregnant and she has the choice whether to get married or not, whether to become a traditional Chinatown wife or pursuing or a university degree, she opts for her own independence and upward movement. So Kwok tries to create an immigrant version of Bildungsroman and translate the child's vision of a migration story in a rather subtle way. Gradually, each of the characters develops her own sense of attachment, and the perception of space, geospatial identification is is among many factors contributing to it. She describes several places in which women exist, and first place, most important for them, is the private space, the intimate space of home. They spent many years in Brooklyn apartment, unheated, almost unheated, with black plastic bags instead of windows, in the company of rats and roaches, but they have no way out to be here. And certainly this is kind of a stereotypical representation of poor immigrants, and it might be kind of the author's trick to evoke readers' empathy, but as I already said, it draws on the author's experience. And can you show the next slide? This is Jean Kwok and the cover page of her novel, and next one. Thank you. These are actually the shots from her interview to the Dutch television, where she describes her real life experience, and they actually come up to these places in New York that look a little bit similar, and she even says they look better than the kind of apartment they lived in when they arrived. So The idea of home is, in common perception, is associated with the family hearth, place of comfort, peace, and refuge. And Kwok's home and the home of her protagonist is precisely the opposite. She says, the way to the apartment is laid with ice, quote, the air smelled dank and filled with dust, unquote, and the door, resisting with its heavy weight, finally, as she says, quote, gapes wide like the black mouth, unquote. The mother and daughter have to live through many years in this apartment, as I already said. So there is no way that this kind of apartment can derive the feeling of attachment. It is diminished to pure functionality of placeness and survival. And certainly there is no way to belong for such home, and it doesn't develop. This absence of possibility to possess a home does not facilitate the inclusion into the community, whether it is ethnic community of the Chinese people or Americans that the protagonist girl is acquainted through her school. So instead, the two women form their own small community of mutual care. This is the private space, the intimate space of home. Still, they certainly function in the outer space, in public spaces. And one of them is another one that to tolerate and not to belong is the place of the sweatshop where they have to, what can you show the next slide? This is probably one of the pictures that they looked like. The owners of such places, Chinese people, they practically enslave their compatriots fresh off the board, who do not get oriented in American economic landscape and intimidated by the insufficient knowledge of the English language, are unable to seek for better jobs. So you can see the conditions are quite poor, the labor norms are high, the wages are miserable, and lots of families spend most of their lives, of their time working there, circumscribed by these conditions, unable to reach outside. For Kimberly's mother, a teacher of music back in Hong Kong, the factory work is a sign of the social descent and downwardness. She succumbs to the conditions, but at the same time, she professes her inner resilience. Although she is unable to get out, she doesn't establish close relationship with any other workers and holds herself estranged. So the factory stands in the way of attachment and belonging. There are no common outside interests for the people working there. Consequentially, they remain distanced in outside in the few hours that they have outside, out of work. And similarly, adverse situation is encountered at school. Can the protagonist belong there, Kimberly? Out of the three educational levels that she experiences in the United States, the first one of the elementary school apparently doesn't evoke any sense of attachment. The only Kimberly's link to this unfriendly world is her classmate Annette, who becomes the closest friend, and even with her, she has lots of secrets, and especially the secrets about their conditions of life. The Chinese tradition of keeping the face, preserving dignity, doesn't allow to expose destitution. And Kimberly gets a stipend to the private school in Brooklyn named Imagined in her work as Harrison Prep, although, again, she is unable to establish friendship with her more affluent peers for obvious reasons, for her also being of different social and financial status. So the school doesn't help to develop attachment. Quite unexpected, can you? Well, so just several pictures of school, and the next one, please. Thank you. And quite unexpected for such type of a narrative is the underrepresentation of Chinatown, which is supposed to be a community place, but the two women don't frequent it. They visit it only to buy some authentic products or and to make some food or medicine, traditional medicines. Kimberly's guide into its community is her sweatshop body, but while Chinatown is a place of ethnic kinship, common language and belonging, still it is not a place of refuge in the unknown world. It signifies backwardness, stands as an embodiment of the past that the women tried to run away from. It denies the purpose of the whole life-changing move to America, which purports the upward mobility and better perspectives for the child. It prevents or at least slows down the forward movement so that eventually an immigrant who stays there would ask a question: why did you come here if you keep looking back? Obviously, there is still another reason for staying away from Chinatown. Certainly, they simply don't have a time to go there outside their toil at the factory. And finally, can you show the next? Yes, slide, thank you. The bigger New York, the outside New York, outside school, factory, and home. It still lurks as a dream. And even in this interview, I think it's her intention to show this distance because they look at those I would say symbolic representations of New York, the images from the other bank of the river, yes, still from the distance. It remains as distant as the imagined place seen from home in Hong Kong. The Liberty Goddess, as they call the Statue of Liberty, doesn't get down from her heavenly heights, or it doesn't approach. And it is the same unachievable ideal of aspirations that the migrating family had kept in mind on the way to America. So, and I assume it is noticeable how many times I used the negative form, don't or not, yes. This is because many things do not happen in the lives of immigrants the way they had thought about. Such ingredients of the American dream as the riches and opportunities do not come along with the arrival. They are earned through the toil and are often destined for the younger generation, which is expressively determined and far superior and should be far superior to the American peers to achieve something. The city of New York, despite its excitement and ambience, is unable to develop the sense of attachment. And especially for the working class Chinese American family, it remains the same myth and that they had before their arrival. So getting back to Eliot's idea of arrival as indispensable from negation, in the dichotomies of attachment and disattachment, the destiny of an immigrant is incompleteness, continuous movement and fluctuation. Thank you.
You. So, Sarah, would you rather stay there or come here? Yeah, you want to be in charge of your slides, yeah. Thank you very much. So I'll see which one to go. So we have your slides. That's me? Yeah, brilliant. So we just get you up properly. And from the beginning, I'll just introduce you just briefly. So our second speaker, and thank you so much, Oksana. It was really, you gave us so much already to think about and to, I think, bounce from. Our second speaker, though, is Sarah Huxley from University of Lincoln with her paper, Performing Reimagined Gender Identities, the Girl Warrior Drummers of Rwanda.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, it's a complete delight to be here. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Sarah Huxley, and I would also like to acknowledge other colleagues, as this is very much a collaborative piece of work, including Professor Ananda Breed, Gakiri Odili-Katsi, who we call Kiki, Dr. Adrienne Zaitef, and the number of girls from Hue in Rwanda, who I'll be talking about today. So let's begin. And the first way that we're going to begin is by hopefully watching a short video which will introduce you to the context of what we're talking about today. Well, sorry. Okay, lovely. So there you are. And I think what's really interesting in the video is the space that was being used, a physical outdoor stadium. And it's quite interesting at the end, I'll talk about it a bit later, but the girls physically took over that space. But you might have seen also that there were some young men, some footballers, it's normally a football pitch, that were actually on the outskirts. And so the stadium did actually dissolve in the end. Okay, chapter 1, overview of Gira and Goma. 275 girls from 11 schools in the Huye district of Rwanda gathered in a school stadium. 100 drums sat expectantly before the festival performance of Gira and Goma, 1 drum per girl, as part of a 2-day festival from the 27th to 28th of March 2024. This would be the 4th in a series of festivals in which Gira and Goma used drumming to reconstruct culture for gender equality as part of an AHRC GCRF funded project entitled Mobile Arts for Peace. The project aimed to explore how children and young people could use arts-based methods to communicate their issues and needs to decision makers. In this case, the drum was historically reserved for boys and men, and thus the very act of drumming symbolizes a transformation of culture to reposition girls and women as drivers of cultural change. On the 27th of March, the girls collectively created an explosion of energy, joy, living culture, and hope, going beyond their own bodies and lives, embodying, challenging, and calling forward alternative lived experiences, including through the performance of Ibivugo, which is traditionally the male warrior self-praise poetry. Their fierce proclamations included, "I am the mighty, I don't run away, I am fearless." Chapter 2, Positioning of Drumming in Relation to Rwandan Culture and the Gender Equality Policy. My colleagues, artist Gakiri Katisi Odle and Kiki, that's her here on the right, and Dr. Adrienne Zaitsev are currently finalising their article for this project, and I would like to share some extracts of their paper discussing the positioning of drumming and warrior poetry in relation to Rwandan culture and the gender equality policy, and then move on to my own considerations of the imaginary and emplacement as a lens through which to consider my ethnographic encounter with the 4th Drumming Festival. In Rwanda, the drum in Goma, played with sticks, is one of the major traditional art forms. In pre-colonial Rwanda, drummers were called abiru, the guardians of history and oral tradition. According to ethnomusicologist Jos Gansemans, drumming was an elitist art central to political power, a form of sacred language that gave rhythm to the life of the king and the kingdom. The Kinyarwanda word in Goma means both drum and kingdom, or reign, showing the close relationship between drums and power. Only the king and the queen had in Goma ensembles, as well as a few chiefs who represented the power of the king in the provinces. Following Belgian colonial rule in Rwanda and the move from a centralized kingdom to a republic, the drums evolved towards a more popular practice. After the fall of the kingdom, Ngoma ensembles multiplied in the thousands of the hills of Rwanda. Each commune had its ensemble, though the training suffered in quality from the exile or disappearance of master drummers from the court. Despite the democratization of drums, women still did not drum. That is until Kiki Gakiri decided to offer artistic workshops and develop a troupe of 11 female trainers who eventually trained 275 girls in schools in Hue as part of MAP. In 2019, the training program was officially launched under the name Gira Ngoma, 1 drum per girl. Gakira and Ngoma Nasha perform what might be considered as a displaced transmission, which theatre historian Joseph Roach defines as the adaptation of historic practices to changing conditions, in which popular behaviours are situated in new locales. The female drummers adapt drumming to the evolution of women's role in a post-genocide Rwandan society. And drumming seems like one more step in a de facto emancipation that has been happening for women since the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. According to the Women's Commission for Refugee Women and Children, after the genocide, women represented approximately 70% of the population and often found themselves as heads of households. Thus, the demographic reality of post-genocide Rwanda puts them in positions they had never had before, particularly in relation to leadership roles. For instance, political institutions now must constitute at least 30% by women, with a record of over 61% in Parliament in 2019. In general, the government supports programmes that emphasise girls and women's education. However, there are still cultural norms that position girls and women in subordinate roles, and the reservation of drumming for boys and men illustrates these ongoing inequalities that are contained within cultural forms. The revised Rwandan National Gender Policy of 2021 commits to further strengthening mechanisms addressing the persistent cultural norms and stereotypes hindering the effectiveness of gender and equality. Yet this does remain a challenge, as several officials have reported at the festival. And there's one quote that I'll let you read. But we have had good policies, but we hide behind culture. I think that's a very interesting phrase. We hide behind culture. This idea of what is culture. Is it something that's static, or is it something that's living and evolving? And our project very much working with young people, and I think in the previous presentation, another project, that there is this kind of grappling with the imaginary of what culture is and should be. So very much we talk about living cultures, just as we talk about living histories. Okay. So, in the interest of time, I'll move on. The section of the policy on gender and social transformation speaks of gender parity in education, access to reproductive health services, poverty and social protection, water, sanitation, gender-based violence, and men's engagement in gender promotion. Yet the deeper understanding of how girls can claim and repurpose public cultural visibility in Rwanda through education and the arts remains in the shadows. For Gakiri, drumming is more than just reclaiming an activity that was reserved to men. She states, it also has meaning at the level of helping women broaden their future prospects. It has also meaning in their own life, to learn how to lift up their heads and change their way of walking, comprehending people, life. Ngoma Nyasha's use of the drums makes available to girls and women an embodied practice that provides strength, confidence. They're really big, heavy things. Like, it's quite remarkable when you see little, some of the little girls, like you actually need quite a lot of physical stamina to drum like that. Ngoma Nyasha's use of drums makes available to girls and women an embodied practice that provides strength, confidence, and a redefined positionality. The body becomes a site for activism. Performance studies scholar Diana Taylor states that it's impossible to think about cultural memory and identity as disembodied. The bodies participating in the transmission of mnemonic systems, transmitting knowledge and memory, are themselves a product of certain taxonomic, disciplinary, and mnemonic systems. Ngoma Nyasha reconstructs culture through the body, through the very act of drumming, opening a new repertoire of gestures and skills to girls and women to claim agency in public life. Drumming is thus a living cultural art form that reconstructs, seeking to invigorate an expanded gender perspective of cultural educational policy. I now turn to consider the significance of Ibivugu, which is the self-praise warrior poetry, before considering and ruminating with you a relational analytical lens through the concepts of the imaginary and emplacement. Okay. Thank you. Chapter 3, Situating Female Poetry in Rwanda. Historically, women have been present in politics and in the historical records in a number of ways, from pre-colonial times to today, as already mentioned. Politically in the kingdom, the Queen Mother was a key figure, ruling alongside her son, and some of them went down in history as fierce leaders and strategists. The most famous being Kanjogoria. Yes, that's it. I've got to get this right because they'll be really upset with me. Kanjogira, who ruled from 1895 to 1931, and Nyiramuga, who is considered the mother of poetry, according to historian Karangwa. She is the one who created dynastic poetry, whose poems were meant to preserve the history of Rwandan kings and became central to the transmission of history itself. So poetry and proverbs is heavily embedded in Rwandan culture. Nyiramuga is the only women's poet whose name went down in history, according to some. And in Adrienne and Kiki's interviews, the district head of education, the district head of sports and culture, and the manager of the ethnographic museum in Hue all mentioned her to draw and show presence that they had an awareness of women in traditional culture, in this case poetry, yet none of them could name any other female poets. Moreover, Nyiramuga invented dynastic poetry, a type of poetry that's accessible to women, yet in which they do not tell their own story. They do not tell their own story, but that of others, mainly men. Dynastic poems are quite different from Ibivuga, the warrior poetry, performed by the Intorial warriors, in which they detail their victory. These poems, like drumming, the warrior dance, were not performed by women. Their exclusion is meaningful in that it keeps them away from expressions of strength and a set of values related to decision making. Perhaps we can come back to playing that. There's an audio on that. Thank you. Chapter 4, Reconstructing Gender Identities Through Relational Lenses, Considerations of the Imaginary and Emplacement. Kathleen Lennon, the philosopher, explores the links between imagination, the ability of creating images or forms, and the imaginary, that is, imagery bound up with affect and emotion, which is highly significant in the creation of our social world. Lenin argues that far from being a domain of illusion, the imaginary world is a direct mode of perception. It is not something in opposition to the real, but the very ability, faculty, process through which the world is made real to us. In other words, the imaginary shape of the world is something both encountered, created, prompt, and requiring our responses. It combines the past and future possibilities, the making of the absent present, in Fiona Hughes' words, a setting up in relation to something other than ourselves. As the bringing into being, the imaginary suggests that the role of an audience to create the work of art is essential to create and generate a form of new expression, a form of new being. The concern is with plausible truths, and I think Sarah Garland mentioned this yesterday. The concern is with plausible truths rather than a hegemonic singular truth. Connecting back to the warrior girls of Hue, their bodily gestures and language make manifest possibilities of being and becoming. Their performances are expressions that are public, they are observable, they invite intersubjective response. The encounter, or overlapping, shapes both the performer and the audience. The drumming warrior poetry is an invitation to reconfigure social relations, of what it means to be a Rwandan girl. They are in a relation of overlapping, being in and of the felt world encountered. Here it is useful to also consider the concept of emplacement. The anthropologist of the senses, Howes, coined the term emplacement as a sensuous interrelationship of body, mind, environment. And Sarah Pink went on to develop this further, especially as a way of thinking about performative contexts. The assumption being that knowing is embedded in bodily actions and expressions. Pink's work draws from Nigel Thrift, Tim Ingold and Doreen Massey, and perhaps in the interest of times, I think I showed a little bit of what they think, but basically it's bringing in forms of movement and transition. Again, that concern with living cultures, the relationality, the movement, nothing being static. I like this picture because I think, again, the relationality of the audience is so important to the performance itself. Okay. Thank you. Yes, so Sarah Pink builds on Thrift, Doreen Massey, and Ingold, really talking about places as open and entangled, as activity, as presence, as an event. So something that you can never go back to. Each time or place is different. Each time is a different becoming. Okay. So I guess just to summarize, this example and wider experience of the Fourth Festival suggests that the art form helps shape new cultural identities, but that also the emerging empowered identities continue to shape the use and style of the art form itself, of drumming, of poetry. It's symbiotic. So it's about social relations, but it's also about the art forms themselves and how they are changing. It's dialogic. In terms of addressing the many isms, art forms enable a questioning and a reframing of these in a way that brings emotion, memory, and story to the fore. This seems to facilitate a different type of dialogue in relation to everyday peace building. Collectively, they went beyond their own bodies and lives, embodying, challenging, and calling forward alternative lived experience through Ibivigu. There appears to be a symbiotic nature of how the performer becomes the art form and vice versa, opening up new and placed social imaginaries. Thank you, and apologies for
so difficult when you have such a load of projects and you just want to encapsulate, but you did a great job, so thank you very much indeed, and I'm sure we can follow up with many of those threads in the questions. I think it responds really nicely to some of the things that came up in the last panel as well, so thank you. Now our third speaker is Adrienne Harris from Baylor University in the States, and her paper is Russia or Ukraine, Ours or Other, Reimagining Borders and Homelands in Post-Soviet Film. So while I get your slides up, I'm guessing that you'd quite like to manage your slides. Yes, that's good.
Yeah.
No problem. So
Yes, that's it. Thank you.
there we go. Thank you, Adrienne.
Hello, thank you. Shortly after becoming president, Russian President Vladimir Putin began investing in cultural products that repositioned the Second World War as the central, sacred, most unifying event in Russian collective memory. One of the first films, Star, debuted in 2002 and set off what historian Stephen Norris has described as an explosion of war films. And every spring since then, Russian screens, large and small, have ritually commemorated the war and unified Russian speakers by reminding viewers of victory. Star really exemplifies war culture of the first Putin presidency, and I'm starting with it in response to yesterday's comment about where most Russians conceived of homeland after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Star was a remake of a 1949 war film, another adaptation of a beloved novella by Ukrainian-born Jewish author Immanuel Kazakevich. In Star, a multi-ethnic group of soldiers dies on a reconnaissance mission in Western Ukraine, as indicated by architecture. One soldier is local, he's Ukrainian, but seems as Russian as the Russian leading the group. The group dies just after conveying intel that changes the tide of the war. In an epilogue in this 2002 version, as ghost soldiers march west, looking viewers in the eye, a voiceover reads, "Every spring, the souls of the soldiers who died liberating Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Germany fly to their homeland so that they may see victory in the bloom of spring." Am I doing something? I don't know. Maybe that's me. In the bloom of spring.
There we go. Yeah. Wonder why that was.
Okay.
Don't know. Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yay! Somehow we muted ourselves. We're so sorry. So very sorry. But let's get back. Very sorry, Adrienne.
That's okay. That's okay.
You're on the
And I am
side.
right. Buddy do.
Okay.
That's perfect. Wonderful. Well, it'd be great. The pinging was was distracting. So wonderful. Thank you. Where am I? How excellent. Lucky you. Where am I? What or who is, let's see. One takes place in the steppe near the Ukrainian-Russian border, and I'm so grateful that I don't need to describe the steppe. People have done it for me. I ask how these directors reimagine borders and homelands. What or who is ours or other within a 2015 context, and of course from a Russian perspective. Sergei Makritsky's feature film, Battle for Sevastopol, a quasi-biographical film about sniper Lyudmila Pavlichenko, presents a nostalgic picture of both pre-war and post-war Soviet Union, and through a variety of means reunifies Ukraine and Russia into one Soviet nation, erasing borders and eschewing tensions that arise when, in film scholar Tatiana Shlikhar's words, Russian imperial objectives and Ukrainian national impulses collide. And so there it is, Battle for Sevastopol. Meanwhile, he erects a stark boundary between the states and the Soviet Union, in short, creating a Soviet understanding of geography oriented towards Moscow in binary opposition to the hedonistic West. Pavlichenko serves as a particularly useful example of a seemingly Ukrainian Soviet hero who identifies as Soviet, risks her life to defend Odessa and Sevastopol and Crimea before crossing the Atlantic as part of a student delegation that endeavored to raise money and encourage the U.S. to open a second front. The film begins and concludes in Moscow, the center of Soviet power, as Pavlichenko relocates there after the war. For Makritsky, all Soviet citizens are ours. He approaches national identity by implying and identifying ethnic identity, then subjugating these ethnic markers into an overarching Soviet identity, juxtaposing the Soviet Union with the states, tapping into nostalgia for the Soviet past. And you see both Russian and Ukrainian posters because he released the film on the same day with two different language tracks, so we don't have any kind of tricky Russian and Ukrainian interactions in these spaces, though the original track is in Russian. And the Ukrainian was dubbed. He is a dual citizen, and he made all these efforts to make it seem like a joint production. Russians enjoyed the film, it seems, by box office totals, and Ukrainians did not. So there was Lyudmila Pavlichenko. Very early into the film, young Pavlichenko bests 3 male competitors at a Kiev shooting range. Their surnames betray Russian, Ukrainian, and Jewish roots. Later, Jewish, Russian, and Ukrainian men fall in love with her. Pavlichenko's surname points to ethnic Ukrainian heritage, but she acquired her name from an ex-husband. Her maiden name, Belova, suggests a Russian background. As Makritsky eliminates the husband from his film and attributes the Pavlichenko surname to her father, viewers would assume Ukrainian heritage unless they know otherwise. The character never self-identifies as anything other than Soviet, though she performs a non-threatening, stereotypical Ukrainian identity, spontaneously singing the Ukrainian folk song Svititerin and making vareniki, dumplings, and teaching Eleanor Roosevelt how to prepare and pronounce borscht, the kind of performative Ukrainianism that Russians appreciate and appropriate. Russian-speaking officers drink to Ukrainian cities right after Pavlichenko and her friends sing their Ukrainian folk song, reminding viewers that a multinational Soviet people defended Odessa, Crimea, and all of Ukraine. Roughly 18% of the film takes place in the States, where Americans enjoy white sheets as Soviet soldiers crawl through the dirt. The brightly lit American scenes capture a civilization shallow in comparison to Pavlichenko's motherland. Americans give money for the war effort because they have so much it's hardly a sacrifice. And just as those gathered at a press conference attempt to pay Soviets to fight battles for them, a man offers to pay Pavlichenko $1 million to use her image. She rebuffs him by sending him to her political officer. The comfort of the White House hardly compares to the warmth emanating from fires in Sevastopol caves, by which Lyudmila and her friend Masha spend time together, and Lyudmila consummates her relationship with her commander. The film cultivates a nostalgic longing for a Soviet past when all nationalities depicted, Russians, Ukrainians, and Jews, in fight for Sevastopol, fought as one nation against a formidable enemy when everyone spoke Russian, one language. Makritsky depicts idealized pre-war years in Kiev and Odessa, Khrushchev years in Moscow, and wartime years in Odessa and Sevastopol, symbolically reunifying the Soviet Union without reference to the Russian or Ukrainian border. The battle for Sevastopol unites various nations, Jews, Russians, Ukrainians, against superficial Americans who do not understand their hardships or their histories. You're either Soviet or you're other. Though Ukrainian identity is occasionally marked through folk culture and Jews self-identify, ethnicity does not affect one's loyalty, and they are all Soviet people. Now we turn to Leonid Plyaskin's miniseries, The Young Guard, the latest adaptation of the first chapter book that many Soviet citizens read. And I should say these all three productions came out within the same week. After the liberation of the Donbas mining town, Krasnodon, Ukraine, Soviet citizens learned about the heroic exploits of the Young Guard, an underground group of roughly 100 young people which operated under occupation. So here, remember Edith yesterday showed you the poster of the Donbas, which the Russians claim, and Krasnodon is close to Luhansk. So 100 young people operated under occupation. In 1943, the Nazis tortured and executed 80 of them. Propagandists canonized Oleg Koshevoy. Oh, there they are. Oleg Koshevoy is commissar and organizer. The documents show that Belarusian Viktor Tretikevich might have served as commissar. He certainly played a central role in the organization. Accused of betraying the group, he disappeared from narratives early on. Families would feud over their children's legacies for decades. Many questions persisted, but Koshevoy remained the commissar in the most famous versions. Badeyev's, I'm sorry. Oh, I don't have there we go. Badeyev's 46 novel and Gerasimov's 48 feature film. In the Stalinist versions, Ukrainian culture functions as it does in Battle for Sevastopol. It's kind of sanitized and token. Everyone speaks Russian, and the others are class enemies who hate communism. The untold story of the rehabilitated Viktor Tretikevich provided a legitimate reason for Plyaskin to remake The Young Guard for a new generation. Could make it also much sexier and more violent. Although Plyaskin claims that he based his miniseries on archival documents of witnesses' testimonies, there's no evidence that he did that. And the new version of The Young Guard includes numerous invented characters and plots, namely Tretikevich's love interest, a young Jewish woman named Sonia, and numerous innocent Jewish victims, all while eliminating one of the few ethnically Jewish members who had existed and demonstrated agency, Vera Bortz. The latest version of Young Guard does not use the term Soviet as frequently as we encounter in Battle for Sevastopol. Characters who identify as svai or svoy, a concept meaning one's own or one of us, do so by choosing ethnic terms. They're Russian or Jewish. And the film delineates the svoy idea, these Russians, Jews, from fascist, who are homegrown Ukrainian fascist, the occasional Russian-speaking collaborators, and Nazi invaders. So in other words, East Slavs are filtered, so Russians, Belarusians, and Ukrainians are filtered into Russians. They speak Russian. And then the fascists are those who speak a mix of Ukrainian and Russian. It's not pure Ukrainian either. I think the Russian viewers would have trouble understanding. It's something called Surzhyk. It's a mix of the two languages. I find that this film incorporates these Jewish characters, all victims, right? They're all victims, to show what happens when an invading Western power, in this case the Nazis, emboldens the Ukrainian fascist. And we know that they're Ukrainian fascists because they speak Surzhyk rather than Russian, and they wear embroidered shirts, and they drink Ukrainian moonshine. So they perform a dangerous, stereotypical Ukrainian identity in the Russian imagination. these Ukrainians plunder and they murder and they oppress. Or in Putin's words from February 21st, 2022, 3 days before the invasion, referring to post-Soviet Ukraine, we see an outright pillage of the country's citizens, while Ukraine itself was placed under external control, directed not only from the Western capitals, but also on the ground, as the saying goes, through an entire network of foreign advisors, NGOs, or other institutions present in Ukraine. We see genocide in the fact that people who identify as Russians and want to preserve their identity, language, and culture are getting the signal that they are not wanted in Ukraine. So the Russians, I'm no longer quoting Putin. So Russians need to come into the region to prevent genocide of these people. And that's what Tretyakevich does. 8 minutes into the miniseries, two Nazi officers, considering whether or not they should chase Tretyakevich as he escapes, ask, what can one Russian boy do against Germany? And then the next 12 episodes shows us. He intends to join up with the Red Army, but he ends up organizing the Krasnodon underground movement when he sees what the local Ukrainians and Nazis are doing in Krasnodon. A few words about Tretyakevich. The historical figure was born in Russia but moved to Krasnodon around 7. He was ethnically Belarusian. His Belarusian identity never comes up in this miniseries, and characters only identify him as Russian. Immediately after the Nazis identify the battle-ready and duty-bound Tretyakevich as a Russian boy, we go on to see him defend peaceful citizens, these Jewish characters who cannot defend themselves, and organized citizens who live in Krasnodon into an underground organization. The messages are clear in this film, and it is not a unifying or complicated film. The good people are really Russians, those who speak Ukrainianized Russian and wear Ukrainian embroidered shirts are bloodthirsty and cruel fascists. They behave more cruelly than the Nazis. And we see the things that they're doing. Another minute. Okay, moving on to our third example then. Yes. Though entitled The Road to Berlin, Popo's film is really about, it's a adaptation of Two in the Steppe, another Kazakevich novella. In all three versions, ponder questions about inclusion and exclusion, nationality and morality. Inexperienced, ill-equipped, and poorly prepared, a Russian lieutenant gets lost, fails to fulfill an order, and is court-martialed. Nazis bomb his location as he awaits execution, and a Kazakh private guarding him. They set off for Army HQ. Previous film is about redemption, but this one is about the relationship. And as time goes on, we discover that really that the Kazakh soldier is the true one. He and Agarkov are the brothers in arms. And we have in all three, the previous film and the original version, we have a deserter at the end when we learn that Jurabayev, like his father, dies. Right after that, we have a drunken deserter who's not going to go on and fight. In previous versions, we have a neighbor. In 2015, this neighbor has a name, and it is Mykola, which is a Ukrainian name. So all of a sudden, this version, we have a Ukrainian who is not going to go back through the steppe to fight and defend his homeland. So again, message is clear that we have Kazakh specific loyalty in this film that would be explored more thoroughly the following year in another film, and that we learn that by the end the viewer understands that the Central Asian with limited Russian in the face of someone who would just take Agarkov out and kill him, to quote another soldier, is more of an ally, more courageous, more trustworthy than the neighbor with the Slavic face and the Russian language skills. Not surprisingly, all three films define Svoy, one's own, in binary opposition to the other, and redefine allegiances one might not expect based on geography and ethnicity. though geographical proximity does breed enmity. One sees growth in the film concerning Russian and Kazakh belonging, but very little in the two films set in Ukraine. These three films reflect the 2014-2015 geopolitical situation, the bloodshed in Ukraine, rising tensions with the West, and an allegiance with Kazakhstan. Kazakhs serve as alternatives to Ukrainians, examples of correct behavior and proper respect for Russians, for duty in their shared past history. Kazakhstan fits the narrative of an appropriately pro-Russia, respectful sovereign democracy. Jurabayev knows his place, in other words. When these films were in production, the Eurasian Economic Union was coming together. Belarus, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Russia, an alternative to EU. At one point, Jurabayev tells Agarkov, our step looks like this step. These borderlands hold deep significance for Russians, as they have for a long time. The steppe, Crimea, Donbass, and Don, as we saw in Edith's talk. The ways that these films redraw boundaries, both the imagined geography and the divisions between peoples, play just a small part in the framework that would support the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. But close analysis of such cultural products give us insight into the massive shift that occurred within Russian society between 2000, when Putin became president, and February 24th of 2022. Thank you. This is mine. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. That was incredible. So we now have our third speaker joining us online.
Hello.
Hi, you there, Fatih?
Hello.
Fatih
Okay.
Bomesh?
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay.
How are you?
Yeah, good. Nice to meet
Okay.
you. Thank you
Thank
for
you very
joining
much.
us.
Okay.
So we have our slides. I'm just going to introduce you and your slides, and then you can start. So
Okay.
this is
Thank you.
Fatih Bomesh from the University of Sfax in Tunisia. Brilliant to have you join us, Fatih. And the talk is on identity and social networks, the case of Brits in Malta on Facebook. Now, I can see, just to say, I can see you have quite a lot of slides, so I'm going to try and keep up with you, Fatih. So please just give me a signal as to when to go forward. So your 15 minutes starts now. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. But allow me, if you don't mind, to try to share my screen with you first in order to
Sure.
run this myself.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's fine. Yeah, feel
That could
free.
be more convenient. Okay.
Sure, yeah, please do.
Okay. So I'm just okay, hang on. If I fail to do that, so you are going to, okay. Excuse me. I would like to thank all of you for having me and for this opportunity. I mean, to share with you a few thoughts about this project. Okay. It seems to me that I'm going to fail. Okay, no problem. So
Okay.
I'll leave that for you, if you don't
Okay.
mind. Okay.
No problem.
Okay. Thank you. So this is the. Of course, you already introduced the title, Identity and Social Networks, the case of British expatriates in Malta, but the title is Brits in Malta. And the outline is as follows. So slide 2, if you don't mind, please. I'll begin with the introduction and then a review of the existing literature, then objectives and research questions, then theoretical framework, and some findings, and then concluding remarks. Okay. So the slide 3, please. The main claim is social media have partly strengthened national identities and partly forged new ones online. Okay. So that is the main claim of this paper. By way of introduction, I would say that emigration has raised concern over population loss, right? And you know that British people have always have been known for their mobility, okay? So this is one figure according to a report from the Institute for Public Policy Research in 2006, which says that immigration has been staggering. Okay, 385,000 Britons left the country, and almost 50,000 more than the previous year, with 574,000 immigrants came into Britain. So while the inflow of people is high, you see, the outflow is high also. That is the point. So that is slide 4. Are you there?
Yep.
Okay. So this is another more recent figure. You see, from where do British expats live? More, which indicates or shows that 5.5 million Britons are living abroad, you see, with a rate of around 2,000 people leaving on a weekly basis. That is staggering too, you see. And an estimate of 10,000 expats are living in 40 countries, including the United Arab Emirates, of course, okay? An Arab country. So next slide, please. A review of the existing literature. This is, well, I picked up these two only, but I have more. Borders, Mobility and Belonging in the Era of Brexit and Trump by Jill Martin et al., which says that Brexit sent belonging and citizenship into a tailspin. Okay, very significant. And then my humble study, Brexit and British expatriates in the British newspapers, arguing that British expatriates and Britons are applying for EU citizenship, turning them into British German, British Irish, etc. Right? So this idea of hyphenated identities maybe in the aftermath of Brexit. Next slide, please. So I would say that Britons, who have been traditionally known as WASPs and with a majority status, seem to have gained new hyphenated identities. Okay. So next slide, please. The aim of this study is to contribute to the existing literature on the subject from a ethnographic perspective, not ethnography. I'll give you a few words about this. So the focus is on British expatriates in post-Brexit era, and this time as an online community, in order to gain a better understanding of the impact of social media on Britishness. Next slide, please. I hope you are following me.
I'm following.
Okay. Objectives and research questions. So the main objective is to gain a better insight into online communities. So that is ethnography. And I have two questions. How do British expatriates in Malta behave as an online community in a post-Brexit era? And number two, what is the impact of social media on this community? Okay, next slide, please. So for theoretical framework, I would say this is the tool is ethnography, which is ethnography of online groups. And the concern here is complex cultural studies in action, drawing attention to a multitude of grounded and abstract ideas, meaning social practices and so on, and symbol systems. So these groups, I would say, are informing us about how these formations affect notions of self, identity, and so on, right? How they express the postmodern condition. So we are in a postmodern era, postmodern era maybe. Anyway, so the next slide, please. This is an idea about theoretical framework. And again, I used Kazinets, who argues that online life is much of our life now. Connective media have become a major part of how we experience society and perhaps how we want to experience it. The embodied world slows down as the electric world speeds up. So you see the situation now, okay? So whereas ethnography used to offer a window into some people's behavior some of the time, all human experience today is opening to its grasp. Right now, in the age of coronavirus and moving forward, ethnography is more expansive, relevant, and necessary than ever. Okay, next slide, please. So the focus is on social networking sites, of course, SNS, and I picked up this example, you see, as a case study, Brits in Malta on Facebook. which is one of the most widespread SNS, please, of course, right? Meta. The corpus is, well, consists in more than 100 exchanges from Brits sorry, not in Dubai, it is in Malta, right? Because I worked on another, you see, Facebook group, and you have reactions and comments which are quantitatively analyzed and interpreted, okay? So sorry for this mistake. And the findings, I would say that British expatriates are similar. That is slide 15. Are you there?
Yep.
Are similar to a face-to-face community living in a small town or rural area, sharing various concerns, including job opportunities, best offers, and so on, house rental, purchase, sharing an apartment, looking for English food, and so on, right? In terms of identity, next slide, they seem to have mixed feelings. So this is the main point. They appear as an online community with distinct identity markers and a strong sense of Britishness. On the other hand, they appear or emerge as a new online minority identifying with their host country. Okay, next slide, please. So this is an idea about my major findings. Brits in Malta, I mean this Facebook group, appear as, or this community appears as an online community with a strong sense of Britishness and also a new online minority identifying with Malta. Okay, so for the first point, I'll give you a few examples quickly. I would say that Brits seem to share common interests and concerns, behaving as a homogeneous group, caring for all the members, providing different kinds of help and advice on various issues. Okay, next slide, please. So these are a few examples. Hello, everyone. I'm looking for a job as a nanny or dog sitter. I have experience with children and pets. This is a response. This is the way another expat interacted with her. Babysitting jobs and dog sitting jobs are normally part-time and carried out by self-employed local EU nationals. As a non-EU, you need a full-time job with a work permit sponsored by a local employer. So the idea here is that British expatriates are a non-EU or non-EU nationals. You see the status. Next slide, please. This is another post by Graham after Brexit Brit. Are you a British citizen? If you have left the UK and are now resident in the EU, EA or EFTA, then we invite you to join the private Facebook group, Brits Living in the EU 27, to discuss everything about living and so on, right? So this is another community on which we can work, maybe. But the idea is that this, change in their status, in British expatriates, I mean, okay? This is another one. This is G, the name of the guy. I didn't like to mention the full name. I'd recommend not keeping your car here. I had a Jeep Compass, and because of Brexit, the registration for this vehicle was around 9,000 now euros, you see? So because of Brexit, again, the context in the aftermath of Brexit, things have changed enormously for British expatriates, okay? I'll skip this. Next slide, please, 22. Calling all expats living in Malta. Your opinion matters. We want to hear from you. Participate in a 5-minute survey. Again, this is a British community living in Malta and concerned with, you see, some issues, you see, raised by this community, okay, for help, for whatever. Next slide, please. This is another query. My husband may be taking a job in Malta, and we will know for definite by the end of the month. His potential employer will sort his visas. You see, my son and I would move with him if it comes off. I need to know what we need to do initially. We both want to look for work and so on. So again, this is, okay. Next slide, please. Malta is already overcrowded with cheap labor and rents are expensive. Think again carefully about the move. Again, remember I told you this is, they appear as an online community, but like, similar to face-to-face community in one of the areas in England or, you see, elsewhere in the UK, right? Again, has any Brits moved to Malta lately, found work, etc.? This is the response. Good luck, mate. After Brexit, moving or even living in Malta after Brexit is a nightmare. I suggest you find another Mediterranean island to go to. Okay, so I hope you are following this. These are the examples. Next slide, please. So 26, this is the other part of the paper. British expatriates, a new online minority identifying with their host country. Okay, so again, I would say that they seem to be happy with their new life in Malta, enjoying lifestyle and so on, with the sightseeings, with the outings and so on, right? These are a few examples. Malta is the easiest for Brits, partly because we of the language and the visa requirements are one of the easiest to meet. Okay, so because of these easy things, maybe, and the language, the historical, you see, I mean, connection between Malta and, of course, the UK. As a Maltese and British citizen, here is another citizen, I mean, with hyphenated identity, Maltese, British, British, Maltese. I've never lived in Malta, but my father, who is Maltese, tells me it's really hard to get a job over there, and my family complain about the prices, etc. I'm looking to move there soon, so as I want to be closer to my grandma and so on and so forth, right? Anyway, so this is someone who is willing to move to Malta. This is another one. So I have been living in Malta now for 17 years, and I work in real estate with somebody, you see. If anyone has any questions relating to renting or purchasing a property, or even assistance with applications for residency and citizenship, which I am currently in the process, residency and citizenship. Again, this is, I mean, raising the problem of, again, the emergence of a new community, maybe with, I mean, these British expatriates moving to potential, possibly others, I would say, no longer UK citizens, so possibly looking for another citizenship or dual citizenship or hyphenated, I don't know, identity, right? I'm happy to share any experiences and knowledge gained to help make the process a more stress-free one, you see, offering help to these people, okay? Next slide, please. This is a question, you see, by one of the expats there. My family and I have dual US-UK nationality. This is another type of nationality. Which nationality gives us the easiest route to be able to move to Malta? The response is neither. You need EU. Again, British expatriates seem to move or to have gained, to have put, they have been considered as third countries, you see. Using your US citizenship will give you access. That is the only possible maybe chance or favor, because of this bilateral reciprocal healthcare agreement between the EU and Britain in the aftermath of Brexit. And of course, you know, the controversy. Sorry?
1 minute left.
Okay. Okay. I'm done in well, I still have 2-3 slides. I think I'll be fine.
Good.
Okay. Yes. As a citizen, but working on getting passport, born in England, lived in Malta for a few months as a 10-year and so on. Again, this guy, disillusioned, you see, from the, well, British, but he lived in the US, Las Vegas. He likes to move to Malta, you see. Then this is another guy looking for information, best and most affordable place to live. Gozo, for example. Should I rent or buy? Will I need to pay tax on my pension? Or will I need to pay for medical, and so on and so forth, right? And rent, this is the response. Rent first, always. Find your feet, explore areas to see one you like, see my other past, and you have some other responses, by the way. Look at this. US and Malta, no. So you need to, again, think of that kind of relationship in the aftermath of Brexit between the UK and the EU, okay? And then, well, just to wrap it up, this is the point I wanted to make. I hope, I mean, Brits in Malta have emerged as new online community on social media, but with a strong sense of Britishness, and also an online minority with allegiance to the host country, which is Malta. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fatty, for shining light on something very different. Yeah. Sorry, Edith. Absolutely, yes, yeah. We've already got questions coming in, which is great. Oh, we've got a little bit of feedback. So we do have time for questions, because we've actually got to 1:15 if we need it. That was a really rich, fascinating panel. Fatty, I hope you were able to listen to the other panelists as well. Without further ado, could I throw it open to any questions, including to anybody online? We'll keep an eye out. I think, Tom, you might keep an eye out online. Yes, Edith, be great.
Thank you for 4 really interesting papers. I would like just to ask each one of you, to each of the speakers, to just in a sentence or two, tell us, just summarize what's the relationship of each one of your papers to Imagined Geography. You've placed them in geography, but then what about Imagined Geography? Thank you again.
Thank you, Edith. So should we go with, you've each got a, who's got the microphone?
It's on the table.
But Oksana, you got it first. You'll go first.
Seems to me, yes, I always try to do this because in my research in reference to different texts, I try to see how the new place, and in this case it's the place of New York, is imagined. This new location is imagined by every new writer who has this migration experience. Certainly, yes, sometimes it coincides with real, not coincides, but works in reference with the real places. Sometimes it is, for example, Teju Cole's novel, Open City. He looks at the church and the main character, the protagonist, and he imagines what is the story around this church, what were the stories of those people who came to this church in a couple of centuries ago. What were the stories of the seafarers who left the city? So he doesn't only see the place, but he sees the stories behind the place, which are the works of his imagination, but also related to history, some history of the places. And the same happens with many other writers, like Lila Corman, I mentioned her today, in her Unterzag graphic novel. He imagines New York of the beginning of the 20th century. She mentions, New York of the beginning of the 20th century. She certainly explores the place, walking around. She certainly knows the stories told by her ancestors, but she also brings into her imagination to recreate and reimagine this space. It seems to be like that.
Nice. Yeah. Sarah, next maybe.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. So I think the starting place really is that living cultures are heavily intertwined with place. So culture and place. My background is in social anthropology, but also some social geography. So there's, that's kind of the breakdown of, what is culture is here just as what is place. And actually, I guess through the art form of drumming, culture and place are brought together, and they're continually adapting and continually growing. So imaginary comes into that when I'm drawing upon Kathleen Lennon's concept of the imaginary. So the imagery bound up with affect and emotion. So the drumming, the imagery, the embodied emplacement, also drawing on Sarah Pink's work, of that body-mind environment in that context of the Rwandan drumming, coming to the fore. So it's really something that's very relational with living cultures, place making, and evolving cultural art forms that are contested. And that's the situation in my paper. Thank you.
So in these three films, the Imagined Geography of the Homeland in the steppe stretches from Kazakhstan. That steppe looks like the Kazakh steppe, looks just like the steppe where they are, which is the hazy border of Russia into Ukraine. And it is Crimea and Odessa, which is also the homeland for which all of the soldiers are fighting, up then into the Donbass. If we include a film I didn't talk about, the homeland stretches into Estonia and Belarus as well. So it's a recreation of the borders of the Soviet Union.
Brilliant. Thank you. Fatih, is there an answer you would like to give to that question as well, around where the imagined geography is situated in your work?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this question. Well, if I understood the question correctly, she would like, or the query was about the relationship between British expatriates and the imagined geographies. Is that right?
Yeah, broadly, yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I would say that well, I am specializing in migration studies, and I have gained some knowledge about Britons living abroad. You see, they started with the colonies in the US, and then you have Australia, you see, Canada, and so on. You have in France, they have Little Brittany, right? In Spain, you have the like Costa del Sol, for example. In some places in Europe or elsewhere, they have formed a kind of enclave for them, the British. You see, British, like other people living in the diaspora. And in this sense, the paper shows that British expatriates, I mean, they have, well, and many Britons are leaving now their country to join these people, British expatriates, in order to have this kind of, well, imagined geography, maybe reminding them of the glorious past. I can give you the example of the Falkland Islands, which are still British, remnant of the British Empire and so on. So you have British people there leading the way of life, the English way of life. I hope I gave you a few hints about the connection. And thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, geography and kind of lifestyle imagined in that way. Yeah. I think we have time for one or two more questions. So absolutely. One here and then one at the back. Oh, at the back first. Sorry, I think our colleague at the back was just first. Thank you.
I've got a question for Sarah. I was just wondering whether in your picture of the audience that you showed, there was quite a lot of presumably the mothers and female sort of family members of the girls. understandably, the girls probably are not going to necessarily understand like the weight of performing that kind of alternative and performing the drumming as a kind of gender reversal. Did the parents or the mothers, did you have any sort of conversations? Did they get quite like emotional that their daughters, you know, granddaughters and that were performing something that was traditionally a male field in a male dominated area?
Sarah, sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. So just to put my kind of context positionality into some context, I experienced the fourth drumming festival, so I experienced one, whereas my other colleagues were kind of embedded into the layer of the research. So just to be aware of where how my response is coming from. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I found it absolutely fascinating. So I was sat in the fourth one, so there's a big stadium, there's huge drumming performances happening, and then we're all sat as a performance. And I did actually occasionally watch the audience. That particular image, unfortunately, we didn't have one of the fourth one, that's from the third one, but absolutely, we had conversations afterwards with grandmothers, with mothers, that hadn't, I mean, they'd never seen it, they increasingly support it, and it's kind of interesting now because there's an element of wanting to make a living from it, so it's not as valued as art is for its own sake. The kind of inculcation of it and the significance of it is that now there's a sort of further extension of the project that's emerged, and that's largely through some of the older mothers and grandmothers that there had been conversations with. But also what's interesting about the audience is, yes, there were a lot of mothers, there were also fathers, there are also some local political figures like the mayor of Huye, and all having those conversations. And actually a slide that I took out from an earlier conference is rather nice because it's got the some of the local officials actually practicing the drumming with the girls, which is more than symbolic. It's kind of, you know, it's more than representational. It's trying out new forms of culture in essence. And I think the thing that I had to skip over that was just important to say was that the for Kiki and Ariane, who are the lead researchers really in this project, they would always argue that it's not the girls are not creating and evolving a singular feminine or a singular masculine. It's an extension of femininity and masculinity at the same time. So it's quite an interesting thing, which seems to allow it to happen.
Thank you. And I think we had a question here. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. I had a question for Adrienne about, I wanted to question, in addition to redefining the homeland in the region of Ukraine in the post-Soviet space, I was curious if similar incidents occurred perhaps in both post-Soviet and possibly pre-Soviet in regions such as Chechnya, or some of the, I can't remember the exact definition of the national status, but the nations within the Russian Federation, which perhaps have had incidences where they do not, in the way, strictly resist their defining as Russian, such as smaller federal nations in the Russian Caucasus, Karelia, Far Eastern republics, where they don't define themselves as part of the homeland. And if there are films in that way in that Putin period where that is sort of pasted over, and those sorts of movements, if they're painted as sort of that similar light as the modern Ukrainian nationalists, in that sort of painting them as an enemy of this fiction, not necessarily fictionalized, but idealized homeland of what post-Soviet Russia is.
Could you use the microphone? People online can hear you. Thank
I
you.
cannot think of similar examples. Nothing is coming to mind of similar examples in the way that Ukrainians have been treated in similar war films. Films about Karelia that come to mind. I mean, there's a 2015 one that was filmed in Karelia. And it is, the Karelian culture in a way is just completely absent there. So I think that the Ukrainian case is exceptional.
Given pause for thought there, haven't you?
Examples. I know it's not your research, but I mean, I think Ukraine gets special treatment. Yes, you're not getting the same information. Yeah. You don't, I have no idea why you don't see these wonderful films. And I should also say these are not films that anyone would watch for artistic merit. These are really propagandistic. These are not high culture films. These are yeah, no, not Casablanca. I cannot think of films that are similar. Francis, can you think of anything? Yeah, I can't. No, I really think that the Ukraine is being isolated in this way for a variety of
Do you think that's due to the different relationship where Ukraine is seen as the sort of central section of not only Soviet but of Russian history, as it's a region of battlefields, it's a region of industry and produce?
I would suggest this is a great conversation to continue over the lunch period. So I can see something really fascinating coming here with Francis's expertise and around the table. But thank you so much. Brilliant. Really great.